Grace and peace to all of you resonating lights, you echoes of the Almighty that come out through all time. Welcome. Thank you for joining all of us who are here live, in the flesh, in person. We ask that you pay attention to what's being talked about and you are active in your views. So what does that mean? That means like things, comment on things, subscribe, follow us, get involved, get engaged, because I don't bring 100% of all the information about a topic at any point in time. I bring some of the information. I believe that God leads me down corridors. He leads me down into doorways, and in that doorway I'm able to gather some information, but if you go through that same doorway, you may gather other information, important information. Shout out to Pastor Kev, because on the stream he is always very willing to add to what is being talked about. With his knowledge, which is the equivalent to a theological degree or a doctorate degree, master's degree in the Bible, what he adds, sometimes I ain't even read that scripture. I've never even read that scripture before. I'm being honest with you. I mean, sure. Have I gone through the whole Bible? Have I read it at least once, every scripture? Sure, I have. But in terms of real knowledge of where that scripture is, why that scripture connects, and where that comes from, well, we get the extreme benefit of his wisdom in the comment stream. So even as you're viewing, even as you're watching, check out those comments, because it is edifying and it brings clarity to what's being talked about. If you needed more scriptural references than the minister or the speaker has given you, I promise you the comments will satisfy you, as he's on point with dropping knowledge bombs left and right. And that's also true for all of our other ministers here at New Testament. They all are very active in the stream, and all of you that comment, even if it's just to say that you like what's being said, we appreciate that. And that doesn't discourage you from saying, hey man, I don't know that I fully agree with everything that you said on Sunday. Well, let's talk about it. You know, culturally, we're at a place, we're at a time in our life where the ability to talk about ideas is under attack. The ability to communicate with one another who disagree is a far out notion for a lot of people. Oh, you're this, so I can't talk to you. Well, you believe that, so I can't talk to you. Or I can't fellowship with you. And none of that reflects what Jesus did in his ministry. There was nowhere he wouldn't go. There was no one he wouldn't speak to. There was no thing he wouldn't do to reach the world. And that's our goal. While the micro goal of our life may be to reach everyone in our immediate family, and then uncles, aunts, cousins, nieces, nephews, grandparents, all that's great. But that is the microcosm of the macrocosm that we have, which is the call to the world. And if we can't talk about what we disagree on, then we stay in disagreement. We begin to go down the path of division and separation from one another. And before you know it, there's no fellowship, there's no relationship. And what God intended in conversation between two of his children doesn't happen. We wonder why all of the answers to some of life's most simple problems aren't answered. We can't talk to each other about it. Right. Amen. Because you disagree about the plan of action that I have, and I disagree about the plan of action that you have, and instead of coming together and talking that out and saying, well, what do we have in common? Let's start there. We know what we disagree on. That's open and obvious. It's in our human nature. Just look at females in our society, in our gender roles. Ask them where they want to eat. They'll be able to tell you everywhere they don't want to go and nothing about where they do want to go. This is a tired joke, but we used to laugh about it in college, as we always talked about starting a restaurant. And we were going to name it I Don't Care. It'd be the most poppin' restaurant for all couples around. Because as soon as she says, well, I don't care, well, I know exactly where we're going. And we thought, maybe that'll drive up business. Then I thought, wait, maybe that'll actually encourage conversation and then we'll lose money because no one will come to I don't care because that stops being the answer. But we're disagreeable by nature. We have this innate compulsion to find what's wrong in things. Mary Todd Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln being my favorite United States president, for what he did and what he eventually stood for, what he grew into, because you see the evolution of a man and the evolution of a civilization through his presidency and through that great war. But his wife made a statement that sticks with me more than any other statement he makes. I can read them, I'll know it's him, but for her it's ingrained into my memory. And what she told him as he was facing the backlash for attacking the institution of slavery, because that was the stronghold that made the South strong. Don't be confused about it at all. The North was jealous of the production that the South was making, and it was the industrial era. We were moving towards technologies, mills and factories, and these guys out in the field with these slaves are running circles around us financially. Money was the motivator. Don't be confused by that. And race was used as the impetus to get that money. And that became the most divisive thing in our country and still remains. But I go off on tangents, so apologize for that tangential side note. But what she said was to him, in the midst of all of his going through the suffering of what he was doing, is that if you look for the evil in someone, you will surely find it. And that's true. Very, very wise statement. So what did that do? Well, Abraham Lincoln started appealing to the good in people. The argument changed from looking at this as a negative thing or disparaging the person. Hey, this is a part of civilization. This is a part of life. But we've grown as a people, right? You've grown as a person. You know that that person is just as much a person as you are, not less than. And we struggled with that in this country for years. We still struggle with those concepts some today. Now, I think it's more government propaganda driven than it's ever been before. I believe race relations really have turned a corner. I truly do believe that's not the first thought on anyone's mind when they walk into a restaurant, is how many of a different race is in there and whether you can eat there because of that or not. Now, there are still some that struggle with that, and we pray for them. And we love them through it, just like all our other brothers and sisters who commit more open and obvious offenses. I talk about this because in each of these examples, in each of these illustrations, you see a dichotomy of ideas. What psychology would relate to duality. There is good, there is bad. There is right, there is wrong. There's hot, there's cold. There's heaven, and there's hell. The concepts that I want to get into today have to deal with these doctrinal notions of heaven and hell. And I pose to you a question that I want you to think about that I hope I'm able to give you the answer to throughout the course of this lecture. And that's, heaven or hell, is that a status or a location? Is that an ongoing journey or a destination? Well, let's talk about it, because it seems like that's what we want to talk about now. All right. Heaven and hell are not places we find ourselves in after we die. That's my first contention. My second contention is that neither are static locations in some afterlife realm where you end up on account of your doings here on earth. Shock it all. Your favorite feather ruffler is back to ruffle your feathers about things that you've maybe believed your whole life. Now, we've believed these things because we've been taught these things. They've been ingrained in writing, in literary devices for all time. Because there were always places that existed where death occurred, mass graves, mass burnings of bodies, things that we would attribute to what we see in Dante's representation or Milton's representation of hell, where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. And in the comment stream, I'm sure Pastor Kev is going to talk about the origins of that weeping and gnashing of teeth, where that comes from, what valley existed, Hinnom being the name of it, the valley of Hinnom, that existed, that became a reference point for a place you did not want to go. Now, while I agree with that statement, that is a place you would not want to go. It's very unpleasant. I see people in everyday life, everywhere I go, living in a place I would not want to go. I would not want to live. Doing things and being involved in things I would not want to be involved in and I would not want to be doing. To me, what I see is a being, a divine being, living in hell. Held by death, hell and the grave. Captured by those thoughts. Captured by those happenings. Instead of knowing, oh, that there's a master out there. That there's the sacred one you can turn to, and you have the keys to all three of those things. And the idea behind this message came from a Wednesday night service where we started talking about having the keys to death, hell, and the grave. Excuse me one moment. And in that conversation, what I began to see was, for the first time, I stopped looking at it as simply death, hell, and the grave. There's a key to those things. Well, then I equate them to a door. That's how visually I see it. There's a door to death, there's a door to hell, and there's a door to the grave. And there's a key that opens that door. Now, if you're to walk through that door, what my brain started telling me is what's on the other side? Well, if you have a key to death, on the other side of that door is life. Again, another example of what could be illustrated as a duality. If you look on the other side of the grave, well, that looks like resurrection. If you look on the other side of hell, well, that looks a lot like heaven. And in these three illustrations, what we see is mankind, through psychologists like Sigmund Freud and others, began to grapple with this concept of duality, of the dual state of being that a person is in that I am not just juice, I'm either good juice or bad juice. And those two twins are in constant struggle for taking over this body. Now, I have ministered time and time again that we are both light and dark in our being. But what I hope no one took from that is that you are a light being and a dark being, and those two beings are battling each other inside of your soul. Because that is the psychological understanding of duality, but that is not the psychological understanding that Christ brought us. Christ brought us that we are one. The light is one with the darkness, so much so that the Bible illustrates how great God is. Darkness is light to Him. Light is dark to Him. There is no difference between the two because He sees the two as one. So when we talk about these things, the keys to death, hell, and the grave, those aren't keys to a dual existence. They're keys to understanding that both are within your possible reach. Whether you die or whether you live. Whether you lay in a grave and waste away or you're resurrected. Whether you live your life in hell and that continues on, or whether you live your life in heaven and that continues on, is a choice. These things are not locations. These things are not places. These things are statuses, and they're statuses that are decided in the matters of the heart. So rather, heaven and hell are a manifestation of one's conscious choice of thoughts, emotions, and beliefs in the present, right now. We're not talking about the past. We're not talking about the future. We are talking about right now. That's the understanding. Is we're talking about a manifestation, a creation, your creation, of heaven or hell right now, which is going to attack some notions. So let's go a little deeper. Consider the outer forces and authoritative figures that mold our perception of ourselves through the traditional doctrinal notions of heaven and hell. As a child, fear of not making it to heaven or ending up in eternal damnation defined who I was and why I was here in this life and what I expected after a physical death. Those notions are so powerful, they begin to define who you are. They define who you are because they affect your actions and your deeds. If every action or deed is weighed in the balance of whether you go to eternal life or eternal damnation, that is going to define who you are. And it's going to define who you are because you're not living as yourself right now. Everything is future tripping. You're tripping over a future that hasn't happened yet because you haven't manifested it yet. Whether you wind up in heaven or hell is totally up to you, and you haven't done that yet. So if you're living in fear of one or the other, you're not living at all. You're just waiting for an outcome, and life will not give you a good one. It'll bring you to your knees in the hopes that at that rock bottom place, God once again shows you the stones that you've hit at the bottom, those are for building with. When you're down there, you're down into the real part of you. The real you that exists, the real you that you can build up and be formidable in this life. This doctrine has been used to regulate people's behaviors since the dawn of organized religion. Both the idea of heaven and hell with equal force has been used to keep us from exploring our desires and potential, preventing us from living in the now, present in this creation with our Creator. Psychologically, one is either confined to a perspective of escaping this reality by living on a promise of a perfect afterlife in heaven. I'll read that again. Psychologically speaking, under these doctrinal notions, you are either confined, trapped, in a box, in a cage, no other option, to a perspective of escaping this reality, of escaping this world by living a promise of a perfect afterlife in heaven. Or you're confined to a perspective of cowering in fear of eternal punishment in a burning hell. Both deprive us of full awareness. Both deprive us of a focus on our experience of the now. And the now is where we have to live. The now is where God is. Today is the day of salvation. Why? Because He's here now. And we have no promise for tomorrow. Our life is but a vapor. We say these things, but we don't live these things. If we say these things, then we would know we're not living these things. Because everything is predicated on I have to do X, Y, and Z today, or I might lose my ticket to naked beach volleyball in some third dimension, praising Jesus. Some people believe that we're not going to be clothed and it's going to go back to the Garden of Eden and that's going to be what heaven is. It's weird. I can't tell you what that is. I can't tell you what heaven looks like because what heaven looks like to me may be completely different to you. What hell looks like to me may be completely different than what it looks like to you. So then heaven and hell are an individual experience. Like you have to have an individual relationship with God. See how we're reducing everything that could be two into one? That's the idea. As we get into a frame of reference where everything begins to align and the math adds up. There aren't two destinations if God is one thing, if God is love. If God is love and truth, then eternal damnation is off the table. He couldn't be that God and have that consequence. That is a duality. He's not that person. He's not that entity. Jesus was not that being when He was here. That's not what He demonstrated. How many sermons did Jesus preach on hell? He talked about the kingdom of heaven. And He gave us all the tools we needed to create it now. And in so many lives that He touched, in so many miracles He performed, those people got to experience heaven right then, right there, in the now. Whether that lasts or not is also entirely up to you. The Bible tells us to walk circumspectly and pay attention to the heart for good reason. Heaven and hell are states of the heart and mind. Or more precisely, they're viewpoints that we consciously or unconsciously choose to operate from in our everyday lives. As far as I can tell, heaven is manifest here on earth in your world when you come into alignment with the sacred. What we believe is that when you choose to operate your life as though God exists, you will find a drive that pushes you to adventure. An adventure that consists of confronting and fully integrating your shadow to live your full potential and pursue your purpose and meaning in this life. That conscious decision manifests one's reality when that reality is pleasing to our Creator. That's where heaven is. Where's your heaven? Be thinking about that as we keep moving on. Hell would then look like someone... Oh, let me go back. Sorry. So heaven is when you understand that you are deliberate, you are conscious, and you're the creator of your own reality. But not just yours. It's never just yours, is it? Whether it's good or bad, it's never just for you. In short, experiencing heaven is about consciously creating what God desires to explore in your reality for you and everyone you encounter. A heaven that's all about you? That isn't a heaven at all. That's not what Jesus taught. That's not what we should be expecting. Oh, it's all the things that I would want, none of the things that anybody else would want. That sounds more like hell to me. I wouldn't want to be in there with you. You're just the ruler of hell at that point. You've had to take control over your own third-dimensional afterlife experience. Sounds like power. Doesn't sound like competence. Well, what's hell look like? Well, then hell would look like someone who is out of alignment with the sacred. This is marked by the lack of adventure or a failure to leave where one is comfortable to hide from the suffering inherent in integrating one's shadow, to hide from their true potential and avoid their real purpose and meaning in life. And these decisions aren't made knowing that that's what you're giving up. Most of the decisions that are made are out of convenience, out of comfort, out of the illusion of safety. And you make these decisions because you think that's the better path to take, and it's not. It's always the road less traveled. We know that. That's history. We don't need a Bible lesson. We don't need a parable. We don't need a preacher to tell us that. We know that's the case. For those of us that have had to bring ourselves up from the bottom to the top, have been down at the rock bottom, you know that journey is the journey that no one else wants to take. But if you will, Oh, you'll be something great at the end of it. It's the hero archetype. It's the hero story. Suffering and tragedy are inherent in life. How you confront it makes all the difference. Hell manifested on earth is perpetuated by a negative state of mind, nurturing, limiting beliefs that tell you you're insignificant. That reality out there is dictating the way life unfolds, and life's not fair. See, hell is the creation of your reality from a fear-based perspective. You want to avoid pain, aimlessly reacting to outer stimuli, and often becoming a victim. Instead of creating a life where you and God have come together to reveal your potential and do what is meaningful. In short, experiencing hell has often been characterized by the unconscious creation of what you do not want in your reality. Why is it unconscious? Because the conscious decisions lead us to this nihilistic existence. If what you're telling yourself is that you're insignificant, what you do really doesn't matter. In the grand scheme of things, when you look up in the night sky and you see all the stars and you see all the galaxies, what difference does my 60, 70, 80, hopefully 100 or more good human years going to do on a universal context? Well, if you're in alignment with the sacred, you know that's everything, and that all things are possible. If you're out of alignment with the sacred, you become nihilistic, arrogant, bitter, resentful, because you're the person that refuses to take responsibility for your own reality. Reality is just happening to you, and that's never the case. Now, others do things that affect you. We know that happens. Their impact cannot be lessened in any stretch of the imagination. And that does have an impact on you. But again, is that life being unfair, or is that God offering you an opportunity to overcome it? No, you didn't generate this. This came into your reality, but you've manifested this reality. How will you deal with it? Sounds like a test, but it's just existence. It's just the way life works. And that may not be the most fun thing to hear. It may not get you hooting and hollering and shucking and jiving and just give you all the warm fuzzies in your tum-tum. But it is the truth nonetheless. See, not fulfilling your purpose in life is a violation of the God-given intention of your life. So what is sin? We've talked about that. Hamartia. What does missing the mark and living in hell look like? It looks an awful lot like going against the meaning of your existence and suffering the consequences. You know, oftentimes when I had my failures and shortcomings, and I go through those things, one of the worst things that I could hear, because I didn't want to accept it to be true, is that you have so much potential and you're squandering it, you're wasting it. Because I didn't think I was making a choice to waste it or squander it, right? I'm just going through life. Hey, this is the way the world works. I'm just trying to, find my place in it. And when I would get that response, and it was from good, godly people, my parents, mentors, people in this facility, in this sanctuary, it was the worst thing to hear. Why was it the worst thing to hear? Because I knew it was true. And even if the part of me that was running the show, that was having dominance in my soul, didn't want to hear it, the spirit of me recognized that's God talking to you. Now, it might sound like Sister Lynn. It might sound like your dad. It might sound like Pastor Curtis. It might sound like Pastor Scott. It might sound like Lil Brent. That's God speaking to you, reminding you who you are, reminding you to look for who you are, because we have to do that. Some will say, yeah, well, what about the suffering of the world? Most atheists and agnostics struggle with this question. This is the number one topic of discussion they want to talk about with anybody that professes to be a believer, because how could God, the loving God that He is, allow all of the suffering of this world to take place? And this is tough, but I believe this is as close to an answer as I've been able to come up with. What we can surmise is that when suffering and tribulation come in this life, if, this is the key, operative word here is if you're in alignment with the sacred, then God is actually you, intermingling with an unconditionally accepting universe, providing you with the knowledge and the opportunity to use your free will and explore your creative might. Oh, the places you would go if you only stopped to talk to the one who knows. That's not Dr. Seuss, but that's nonetheless what we're talking about. God knows. God understands. God can relate. Welcome to understanding why Jesus was here. He's been through everything that we could go through. He's faced everything we could face, and He's overcome it. That is our example. That is how we begin to manifest heaven in this earth. It seems as though God is offering us polarities and oppositions to play with, because we are a species that is predicated on play. We've talked about that from the works of Peugeot and others that work with mice and playing games. That is a big part of the mammal existence. Rough and tumble play, wrestling, struggling, contending with one another. So He's giving us oppositions and polarities to play with. Sometimes they win, sometimes we do. The more we win, the more confident we become. The more confident we become, the more games we decide to play. The more games you can be invited to, the more impact you have on the world. And that again becomes a power and competence juxtaposition. Because those that always have to win, they don't get invited to the most games. And most of the people that play with Him stop wanting to play with Him. So He's just going to win every time. She's just going to take the ball, and she's going to do this with it 30 times, and we're going to lose. So why even go? It's those that are willing to risk loss to someone else for fairness, for equality, to really see who comes out on top, to really test their might, if you will. Another video game term. I'm dropping all the references today. I'm on a roll. Because in that scenario, you may lose. And if you lose, that person gains confidence and you gain motivation. Next time, I'm going to watch out for that move. The move got me. You spammed me to death with it and killed me over and over and over again. I'm going to learn how to play defense on that. And then you come back and it's a better match. It's a better game. And then it becomes less about, and this is where we've gotten it wrong culturally. It's right, but it's wrong. Winning and losing isn't the point of the game anymore. It's playing the game with someone else. Now, we don't expect participation ribbons, which is where we get it wrong. You don't get a ribbon just because you showed up and got shellacked. But there is something to be said when two teams come into an arena and they both give it everything they have. Both teams deserve the praise. Both teams brought it. Both teams elevated the other team, and we had something really worth seeing. Because here's the other truth. While you're playing these games, while you're going against these oppositions, while you're struggling and you're contending, there's always people watching you. They came to see what you're going to do. The movie Gladiator, I'm going to keep doing this all day, I guess, is great because he's put into the arena, and he's so skilled at what he does, he makes mincemeat of what would normally be a pretty bloody, gory contest. And he asks the people, what? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you're here? Did you not come to see this? And the reality is, he was never meant to be there. He was doing what he had to do to survive. He was on a path to manifesting a heaven out of the hell he had been handed. He, as God, is intermingled with a horrific, tragic situation where his life was put at stake. He was almost killed. His wife was raped and murdered. His son was murdered. They were hung. They were burned. He was kicked out of the military. He was a wanted man. Then he was sold into slavery and sold to be a gladiator. He could have lied down at any moment and accepted death, hell, and the grave. Instead, he looked at the suffering of reality, the existence that he could not escape from, and he decided to choose life, resurrection, rebirth into something else, someone else. He took the tattoo off of his shoulder for a reason. I'm no longer going to identify as that man anymore. They killed that man. They killed that part of me. They slayed that dragon within me. I'm not going to use him anymore. But what they don't know is that that dragon's not dead. It's just under my control now, under the control of the Spirit, under the control of someone who's purely motivated to make it to, in that context here, Elysium, heaven. And he set out to do that. And he did it by unconventional means. He did it in a gladiator arena, killing other human beings for sport. Is that what we want to see? Is that what we want to spectate? Not anymore. That's the dark side of humanity that wants to look at the death and the tragedy and the suffering and revel in it. It takes a man like that to stand in the midst of that really horrific part of life and say, this is not what you should be doing. You all shouldn't even be here. Why do you want to see this? Because life is worth living, not losing. It's worth saving, not taking. It's worth raising, not lowering. God, however, promises to be an ever-present help in our time of distress. And in such distresses of the soul, we turn to our advocate, where our prayer can generate the manifestation of faith, our hopes, and our love. That's Psalm 121. So let's turn there first. Now, Psalms 121 is known as a song of degrees. This is the first of a series. These were pilgrim songs, and they were sung to attract people for the great annual feasts of the day. This is during the, or associated with the reign of King Hezekiah. Now, for a little more context, Mezek and Kedar are enemies of the Israelite people. But they forced their way into the kingdom of Judah, and they begin to vex the people of God. In Psalm 57:4, they are compared to sharp swords and arrows. And in Psalm 64, verse 3, by Psalm 64, verse 3, they are to be the ones who are pierced and scorched. So you live by the sword, you die by the sword. If you choose the path to hell, that's where you'll wind up. That's the reality. This is an archetypal understanding of the story. This is how I would phrase it. If you and your people set out on the adventure of your lives, on a pilgrimage to attain the celestial city, attain the kingdom, attain what you're supposed to as the promised people, a similar gauntlet awaits you. And it will attack you from within. Because the enemies are already there, they're already within the boundaries, and they're already vexing within. That's what you have to overcome. It's going to be what's within you, what's within your borders, what's within your kingdom that you have to contend with to have the point of your adventure, which is purpose and meaning in your life. Verse 1 reads, I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. Look up. Look up. Stop looking down. Look up. My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved. He that keepeth thee will not slumber. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is thy keeper. Going back to verse 4, remember in Jeremiah, when he sees the vision of the almond branch that's budding, God says, yes, you have seen correctly. I am awake over my word to perform it. The Lord is thy keeper. The Lord is thy shade upon thy right hand. The sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve thee from all evil. He shall preserve thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth and even forevermore. So what in that tells us we have a hell to be afraid of? It's forevermore. God will be this for us. Well, it comes down to free will again. So I say that to say to you an encouragement, be strong and of good courage. Fear not, nor be afraid of them, for the Lord thy God, He it is that doth go with thee. He will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. Deuteronomy 31, verse 6. Joshua 1:9 says it like this, have I not commanded thee, be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with thee. What we're going to talk about first, though, is the juxtaposition of a biblical story that gives us the same as similar motif, and that's Jonah and the great fish. So Jonah is mentioned because we're back to the fish. Sorry, gang. We'll take it to this one. We'll give that a shot.
It's live, too.
Ooh, it's live. It's hot. Okay. Man, you guys have been struggling to hear me the whole time, huh? Because this sounds great. I'll have to back up a pace or two. So I'll give you some context on Jonah, who Jonah is. He's mentioned in 2 Kings 14, verse 25. He's very clearly a patriotic type person, country first type mentality, and did not despair of his country in its darkest days. So he wasn't afraid in that moment. He believed that he was part of the people of God and that God would come through. He didn't despair with the others. He didn't fall into that downward thinking. He was still putting God first, and God was going to look out for him and his people. This commission to Nineveh, though, when God comes and tells him, you're to go to the Ninevites and save them alive, redeem them, was not to his taste. He had no desire to see the great heathen city brought to redemption. Some could say he's an ancient example of a racist. That because these people didn't look like him, didn't believe like him, didn't worship like him, had different cultural proclivities and cultural activities, that God, you can't want to save these people, right? They're not like us, right? And it's like, no, they are like you, Jonah. And yes, I am telling you to go. So, in another century, by the way, that would pass. Another 100 years would pass after Jonah before Isaiah and Micah would proclaim that the heathen world would turn to God. So it took this mindset even after Jonah goes to Nineveh, after he overcomes everything that we're going to talk about, he overcomes, it still takes the people 100 years to hear that word from a prophet or prophets that are willing to say it, that are willing to tell the truth, that are willing to give God's message. It's the whole world that's going to turn to God, not just you and your four and no more. Okay? So they start to figure this out, unfortunately not during Jonah's time. Rather than take up this task of mercy, which is what it is for the Ninevites, because it's sure destruction if they're not redeemed. That's the way things went in those days. Instead of taking up his task of mercy, Jonah decided to hide from God's presence. So God wants to be presently with Jonah right then, right there, right now, and Jonah hides from God. Very similar to how Adam and Eve hide from God all the way back in Genesis. And he runs to a seaport where he might escape his duty. We already know that the concept of heaven comes with the underlying notion that you're escaping this reality. So he thinks he's choosing a better path for himself. He doesn't have to face something he doesn't want to have to face. He doesn't have to teach people he doesn't want to teach. He doesn't have to deal with God. He can just run away and escape from it all. Wrong idea. He's going against the meaning of one's existence is always the beginning steps of the downgoing who manifest hell. Avoiding God means being met heavily with tolls and fares to be paid by us when we take our own way. Jonah is not only set to pay those tolls and fares, but he is taking more than the Ninevites with him as the wind and the storm threaten everyone on the vessel. See, the disasters that block the way of your disobedience are harder than the difficulties in performing God's will. Let me say that again. The disasters that block the way of your disobedience are much harder than the difficulties you face in performing God's will. The way of a transgressor is hard. Exactly right. I was going to quote that, but beats me to it. Jonah is not only set to pay those tolls and fares, but so are others. Note the divine agency at work behind the scenes here. And we'll read this, the word of the Lord came. The Lord hurled forth a great wind. The Lord prepared a great fish. So while Jonah is presently manifesting a hell of his own making, God is preparing a way of escape. God is preparing to be right there with him, right there beside him, right there for him, if only he'll turn to him. There were, in these heathen sailors, beautiful traits which seemed to have abashed or ashamed the prophet. They began praying. They began worshiping. They began seeking an answer for why these things were happening. See, they knew something was going on. This came up out of nowhere. And they, like the disciples do with Jesus, they go down into the hull of the boat and find Jonah sleeping. Now, it's a very different outcome. But nonetheless, it's a similarity. Because Jonah is called to be the God of the Ninevites. He's called to be God to that people, to redeem them, to save them, to help them be reborn into a more astute, more serving purpose for their existence, to turn them to the Sacred One. He's the Messiah. And as the Messiah was found in the days of Jesus, he was found in the days of Jonah, sleeping in the boat while the storm's going on. It's just an interesting parallel. We don't draw too much into it, but it is something to consider. Because he's somehow even at peace and at rest while he's manifesting his own hell. How many have been there? Where you're caught up in something that's got a hold of you. It's making you do things you wouldn't normally do. You're saying things you wouldn't normally say. You're behaving ways you wouldn't normally behave. And then yet, somehow, you just are comfortable in it. Right in the middle of all the hell that's going on around you, you're seemingly unaffected by it. I think about the meme on the internet of the dog in the office room where everything's on fire and he's kind of looking at the screen or who's taking the photo of him sitting there in the office. He goes, yeah, I'm fine. Everything's fine. It's like, you're not fine. The room's on fire. You're going to die in there. Yeah, well, we see that echoed in all types of propaganda where things are going on behind the scenes and you're being lulled to sleep to just accept those things as normal. Oh, well, living in this hell is just normal. I know people that live like this, and I know people that live worse than this. Instead of saying, I know I don't have to live like this, instead of having a real God prodigal son moment of saying, even the servants in my Father's house are treated better than this. I don't belong in this hell of my own making. I belong in a heaven of my own making, and I know who I've got to run to get it. I know who to go see to attain it. I know who to go love on to give it to me. I've got to go back to my Father's house. And He's prepared, and He's been waiting for you the whole time. It's big. Their prayer to their idols and their false gods, as they would call it. But in the Bible, when you read it, the gods they're praying to, it says Elohim. It's a plurality of gods. So again, this is the same God we're talking about in Genesis that these people are praying to. They may have called it culturally in that time another name, but they got through to somebody because God showed up. He was already making the preparations. And I don't believe that's just for Jonah. Not for 1 minute. Their prayer to their idols and their endeavor to save this strange Jew are as instructive as they are remarkable. See, I believe it was their fervent prayer that would inspire Jonah's own prayer later in the story. Let's pick up the story. That's kind of the first chapter. We're going to pick up at the end of the chapter 1 in verse 17. She'll flip over to chapter 2 real quick. So Jonah 1, verse 17. Now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Now, I say that to say this. If your human body is eaten by a great fish, whether he chewed on you or not, you're going to be in a digestive system, in digestive juices, being broken down as food immediately. That process is going to start. So when I read that, I don't read that Jonah is somehow on a raft or a piece of driftwood floating around in this fish's stomach bile, somehow still miraculously alive. Because I don't even know how oxygen works in the belly of a great fish. I mean, they breathe through gills. So we're, unless we're mammals, unless it really is a whale that has a blowhole, that thing can hold its breath for a long time. I don't think Jonah can hold his breath that long. And you've got pressure from the water. I mean, there's so many things that were taught as a kid that now as an adult, I'm like, do you guys ever go to science class? None of this makes sense. It was and you're hit with the response, right? You're immediately reprimanded by your teacher. Well, everything's possible with God. Is it? Is it? Well, I guess so. I think that point is proven much better later in the story. We could follow the scientific road and still get to a much better conclusion than that. But I digress. What I'm going to say, the way I'm going to phrase it, is that Jonah has died. He is no longer breathing oxygen as a human being on this earth. His body is being decomposed in the belly of a whale, and his soul and his spirit are still alive. He's made life hell. He's brought hell to earth, and now he's experienced it by being swallowed by a fish in the living world, and he's experiencing it in the afterlife. So hell transcends this life. It was hell on earth, and it was hell after the fact. But the beauty of the story comes next. Chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. I broke this up a little bit to save a little time. Then Jonah prayed unto the Lord his God out of the fish's belly, and said, I cried by reason of my affliction unto the Lord, and he heard me. Out of the belly of hell cried I, and thou heardest my voice. So, let's attack another notion of hell. If you do wind up there, you don't have to stay there. People need to hear that. If you wind up there, whether in this life or the next, whether this life turns into hell and it carries over into the next, if you just come to the place where you can cry out by reason of your affliction, by understanding the affliction that I face is my own doing. I made this happen. I was disobedient. I'm crying out to Abba saying, God, I understand by way of my affliction why I'm here. Will you just hear me? He doesn't say, save me. He doesn't say, resurrect me. He doesn't say, give me another chance. He just says, in this place where I have been put in a complete place of separation from God and all things good and all things that I would consider heaven, I just need to know, do you still hear me? And Abba heard his cry. Out of the belly of a fish and the belly of hell, he heard Jonah's cry. Jump down to verse 6 and verse 7. I went down to the bottoms of the mountains. The earth with her bars was about me forever. So I was in a grave, an earthen grave. My earthen body was in a sea tomb of this great fish, and I couldn't get out. Yet, hast thou brought up my life from corruption, O Lord my God, from my corruption, from my bad choices, from my decision to disobey that created this hell. You've brought my life up from that corruption. When my soul fainted within me, I remembered the Lord. Just like we talked about on Wednesday, those midwives in Exodus, when they were told to kill all of those firstborn boys, and they just didn't do it, and they couldn't do it. Why could they not do it? Because they remembered the Lord. And He heard them. They weren't put to death. They could have been. They weren't. Because their remembrance marked something in the Pharaoh. I haven't dealt with this before. I'm unfamiliar with this. This pushback is something else. This isn't just mutiny. This isn't just civil disobedience. This is something more. So we're going to have to find another way to accomplish this. Remembering God is the remembrance of who you are. You have to face who you were, and you have to understand who I was is not who I was supposed to be. I was supposed to be this. And if I could just be this, then maybe in my prayer, maybe in the belly of this hell, maybe in all of this darkness and separation, maybe if I just pray as what I should be, who I should be, and I remember the God who created me, maybe He'll hear me. And I'm here to tell you, it's not a maybe. It's never been a maybe, and it's never been a no. He will hear you. Because He's the God who does not leave and does not forsake. He will be with you always, even unto the end of the age. And in Jonah's life, it was beyond the end of his age. It was into the afterlife. So hell's not a permanent thing. Eternal damnation doesn't have to be so. You can choose it, though, in your pride, or whatever your deadly sin is. Whatever your way of missing the mark is, you can hold fast to that and be separated from God if you choose. Verse 10. And the Lord spake unto the fish, and it vomited out Jonah upon dry land, and he was alive. And it doesn't say anywhere in the Scripture that there was any markings on his skin, no scarring, no wounds, no bleeding, no decomposition. He's dead 3 days. And he gets spit up like he was just swallowed 5 seconds ago. So, all right, Sunday school teachers, all is possible with God. Let's just save that line for this part of the story, and not the part where you try to convince me a man lived in the belly of a fish for 3 days. Fair? Okay, great. See here, what Jonah manifests in his own reality by choosing to hide from God instead of hiding in God. See, if we hide in God, if we allow Him to bring us into the secret place, if we allow Him to bring us into His pavilion, His tabernacle, if we hide in there, what we can bring with us is everything that wants to pull us away from Him. All the issues, all the battles, all the dragons, all the demons, all the darkness. If I can just hide in God, I can bring all that with me because He already knows it's there. Oh, and if I can hide in Him and I can work through these things with Him and I can confront these things with Him, what I'm going to be on the other side of that, God, I don't know what it is, but I know it's better than where I am right now. I don't know where you're going to take me with this, but it's better than where I could take myself. I don't know how many lives you're going to set free, but I'm here to save them all if you'll just let me. When you hide in God, you allow God to make you into what He purposes you to be. Imagine if Jonah takes his patriotism and racism into hiding with God, and God helps him contend with it. Does the outcome change? Well, no. To be honest with you, the outcome doesn't change. He still goes to the Ninevites. The Ninevites get redemption. He does what he's supposed to do. But does the journey change? Oh, the journey changes significantly. How so? See, the disastrous path of his disobedience didn't have to be traversed. You didn't have to face all those disasters to get here, Jonah. You just had to face yourself. You just had to face the disaster that is you. Instead, you had to face the disasters that not only plagued you, but plagued others. And could have cost a lot more what they were supposed to have. And you did that out of thinking that was the convenient choice. That was just the easier, or even, if we're going to call him a racist, and I think rightfully so, well, you believe to be right. Well, you believe to be true. Remember we talked about orthodoxy and heresy? Orthodoxy is right belief and heresy is an alternate belief. Well, everyone that believes what they believe are orthodox in their own mind because they believe what they believe. And if he believed those things, then he had some real things to contend with. He had a real disaster inside himself to contend with. Because the hatred for another man or woman based on how they look or how they live their life is an absolutely despicable thing. It's one of the most despicable things that we engage in as human beings. But that's another story, and I don't want to digress too far down that path. It's just how I feel about it. Jonah did all of this to himself from his heart. And out of the abundance of his heart came a decision that would manifest a hell of his own making. God recovered his son from his bad decisions, and God delivered him so that he might go and fulfill the purpose of his existence. This calls into debate another tenet of the doctrinal notions of the permanence of heaven and hell. It would seem to me that the permanence would be contingent upon your choice or our choice to either hide from the meaning of our existence given from God or hide in God with all our faults and battles to allow Him to seek us. Play hide and seek with God and see what happens at the end of that game. It's worth playing. And He allow Him to reveal to us the meaning of our existence. See, the act of either choice brings about the manifestation of heaven or hell respectively, at least as far as I can tell today. Now, we're getting close, so I'm probably going to finish this up on Wednesday. Imagine that. But I will give you kind of a brief intro as to the next story we're going to be talking about. And I went through the process of kind of going through this biblically and scripturally so that if you're unfamiliar with this story, you at least know what I'm trying to extrapolate from it. Is that fair? I know Hook, we kind of went through the story, but that was a childhood story. I know that story like the back of my hand. I've read this book multiple times, but it's a dense read because it's written in the 1800s. And they talked a different type of English back then. See, I said talked a different type of English. They would be like, it's spoke, sir. Pardon me, sir. I challenge you to a duel. Slap. Somebody had to die at the end of that back in those days. You know what I'm saying? You get slapped nowadays, you know, what, are you going to press charges? Back then, you had to die. You slap me, I'm going to shoot you, dude. We're going to walk 10 paces. We're going to see who the best man really is today. Going to learn today. But what I want to talk to you about and kind of illustrate this duality, this concept of heaven and hell, and being the creator or the manifester of that, is the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's written by Robert Louis Stevenson. It's written back in 1886. And it is a novel about a dual personality and has become influential in the growth and understanding of the subconscious mind through its treatment of a kind and intelligent physician who turns into a psychopathic monster after imbibing a drug intended to separate good from evil in his own personality. And I'll give you a little bit of info on Mr. Stevenson before we get into the story, because it's worthwhile going into. He was born to a leading lighthouse engineer named Thomas Stevenson and his mother, Margaret. Stevenson would find much of his childhood spent at his maternal grandfather's house, who was a minister of Scotland, and his name was Lewis Balfour. His parents were both Presbyterians, but admitted that they didn't adhere to the strict rigors of Calvinism. But Stevenson was a sickly child. He had a lot of illnesses growing up. He was very weak. He was very frail. When he grew into a man, he never grew to be very big in stature or size just because of his childhood issues. But because of that, he was under the care of a nursemaid, Miss Cunningham, whose religious proclivities were much, much more stringent. So he had a mix of religious beliefs. He had the beliefs of his grandfather, who was a devout minister. He had the beliefs of his parents, who were kind of like, oh, we're Presbyterian, but I mean, it's Wednesday. And then you had his nursemaid who's taking care of him, and she is very much so like the grandfather, very devoutly religious. So he's got this mix of experiences even within his own young life. Now, this left Stevenson with a precocious apprehension about religion, because I'm hearing you tell me all these things that we need to do, but you're not really living them, or you're living them, but it doesn't feel like it's a good thing. So, he had this, and precocious meaning this kind of advanced caution towards getting involved in organized religion. And you would see why I would connect to Mr. Stevenson if you've had any time to really listen to what I've had to say. In his young adult life, though, he would fall into atheism. I, too, would never have considered myself an atheist, but I did toy with agnosticism because I just don't know. I don't know the answer to that. And I got stuck in that rut for a little while of, all right, I know God's real, but I don't know how God's real. That was my kind of, toe in the line type of thing. And eventually life proved to me over and over again when in moments where I had made a hell out of my own life, that God heard me. And then what I realized, what I don't know matters much less than who I do know. And I know the creator of all things, so why do I need to know it all? I don't need to know it all. I just need to know God. And if I can know God, He'll give me what I need to know. And what I don't have that I need to know, He'll give to somebody else to give to me. Because we're all a family. We're all interconnected in this spirit understanding of our being. We all come from the same source. We all come from the sacred. He had been writing since he was a child, mainly due to his reliance on stories that were told to him while he was ill and stuck inside the house and couldn't get out and play. His father actually encouraged his writing, as this was something he too had engaged in as a child, but his father, AJ, demanded that he put away such nonsense. Quit the writing. Quit being creative. Grow up. You're going to have to work a job and have a family. Thankfully, in this story, he didn't replicate the same mistakes of his father, and he actively encouraged Robert to write. And that's what Robert did. Now, Stevenson's atheism didn't last, and by the ripe old age of 27, he wrote the following to his father. I say the ripe old age because Robert Louis Stevenson died at 44 years old. He had a very short period of time on this earth. Very, very short. That's getting close to me. So I think about those things when I read them. At 27, he had put away atheism, and he actually wrote to his father, who, and this struck me really hard, because you could tell his father really loved him, and he really wanted him to make the right decision. And he knew what the decision Robert was making could turn into a hell of Robert's own making. But when he told him, his father, that he was an atheist and he didn't believe in God, his father said, I have completely failed as a father and a man. So none of the provision that his father told him he had to make, going to work, getting a job, providing for your family, none of that came to his father's mind as, you don't believe in God? I've failed you. Man, what a thing. What a thing to hear. What a place to put your father in. You put him there. Stevenson realizes this, comes out of it, and this is what he writes, and I wrote it down because it's worth sharing. Christianity is, among other things, a very wise, noble, and strange doctrine of life. You see, I speak of it as a doctrine of life and as a wisdom for this world. I have a good heart, and I believe in myself and my fellow men and the God who made us all. There is a fine text in the Bible, I don't know where, to the effect that all things work together for good for those who love the Lord. Parents, let me tell you something. If you think you're wasting your time bringing your kids to church, if you raise them in the way that they should go, they will not depart from it. I don't even know where this is in the Bible. But I remember what you said to me when I told you I didn't believe in God. And God's changed my life. He's rescued me from that pit that you saw me go down into. And you despaired when I did. But I found God again. And I don't know where it's written. I can't give you the chapter. I can't give you the verse. I can't even tell you that I'm quoting it properly. But there's something I remember from my childhood. There's something I remember about myself. There's something I remember about my parents, my godly grandfather minister, my godly nursemaid who had attached themselves in alignment with the sacred. And it goes like this: all things work together for the good for those who love the Lord. He goes on, strange as it may seem to you, everything has been, in one way or the other, bringing me nearer to what I think you would like me to be. Excuse me. 'Tis a strange world, indeed, but there is a manifest God for those who care to look for Him. We talked about my son hiding on Wednesday night. I mean, it's a cute thing. He loves to hide. I never loved to hide. My younger brother did, though. Super enjoyed it. Especially when no one could find him and everybody was about to call the police. Because he's gone. He's gone. He's not. He's under that table underneath the sheet and hasn't moved or breathed in 4 hours. I was never into it. I would hide to jump out and scare my mom. That was great. I still do that to this day. I just like to think I'm keeping her heart in good condition. That's all it is. But when I think about my brother and I think about my son, they weren't hiding from us. They weren't hiding from a consequence. They weren't hiding from a bad decision or a wrong decision. Well, my brother might have been a bad decision a couple of times. A big shout out to Doc. He's our producer. For all those that are watching, I'm giving him a little hard time right now. But they were hiding to be found. They were playing hide and seek, even though they didn't tell anybody, hey, you guys should be seeking me. They didn't tell us that. My son doesn't say hide and seek. He just says hiding. And he'll hide right in the room that I'm in. Cover himself up with pillows or pull a blanket over his head. And he thinks if he can't see me, I can't see him. But what God showed me is, because As a parent, you want to relate to what your kids do, and sometimes you just don't. I have daughters. There are things that they're into. I have no frame of reference for that. It makes you happy? You like doing that? Great. Do that. Do you need my help? No? Great. Because I have no idea what I'm doing with that. But what God began to show me was, you've hidden before. Yes, I have. Why did you hide? Well, Lord, you know me. Yeah, I know, but humor me. Answer the question. All right, well, I did something I shouldn't have done. So what was the purpose for hiding? Well, I was hiding from consequences. A lot of times I was hiding from my parents or teachers. But more importantly, what I came to realize in that discussion with God, and that's how my conversations with God go, in case you want to know. I realized I was hiding from Him. See, all those conversations I had talked to you about earlier about potential, I had been running like Jonah from that. From this calling, from being in this place. I had considered myself insignificant, unworthy, unvaluable, tarnished. Can't do this. Shouldn't do this. Yeah, that's stronger. Not can't. I can do it. Shouldn't do it. Because there's someone more qualified than me. Someone that makes more sense out of this than me. Right? And God said, well, the you that was making the choices that made a hell out of your own life, I would agree with you. He wasn't ready for that moment. But if you'll stop hiding from me, and you'll bring the things that weigh you down, you'll bring that yoke, you'll bring that burden along with you, and you'll hide in me, I promise you I'm seeking you. You don't even have to tell me when you start hiding. I'm already ready to play the game. When my son yells out hiding, I'm ready to play the game. Because he's not hiding from me. He's hiding for me to find him. And I think that's what, deep down, when we talk about this childlike faith, and sometimes I understand that can be a difficult concept because, hey, we're not children. Some of us. We're adults. We have responsibilities. We have things that we have to take care of. We have jobs that we have to work. We have relationships that we have to maintain. We have responsibilities that we have to keep up with. But the understanding is like the rich young ruler, as another illustration. Leave all that behind and just follow me. You know, the Bible says when you put God first and you seek ye first the kingdom, you go to hide in God for Him to find you. That's what seeking the kingdom looks like. So I'm hiding away in Him. I'm hiding away in the secret place. I'm allowing myself to enter into the pavilion, into the tabernacle with God to deal with these things. The purpose is to confront them so that I can be what I'm supposed to be and I can manifest heaven in my reality. And the more I can manifest heaven, the more permanent heaven can be. Oh, and to get to the place where heaven is a permanent fixture in your life. That affects everyone that encounters you. Because at any moment you could bring heaven into their world instead of bringing hell into it, which is what none of us should want to do. But in the story, and I'll wrap up with this, one of the characters discovers the tale of this Mr. Hyde who's running about town. And he says, well, because he's kind of in investigator mode, and I think about him like this, he's probably got a pipe, little heavy set, got the full cul-de-sac, killing the game, waistcoat, pocket watch. He says, well, if he'll be Mr. Hyde, then I'll be Mr. Seek. And that's who God is. If you'll just admit your Hyde and bring that in to me, Dr. Jekyll, I've been seeking you the whole time, and I'm ready to bring out of you everything you have to offer to this world. Because, unlike yours, my yoke is easy. My burden is light. And the youthful aspect of that exchange is something that Dr. Jekyll struggles with in this story. It's one of the compulsions he has for doing what he does. So with that, thank you for your attention. Thank you for wading through quite a long introduction. And we will pick up with the story, the plot, the understanding of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde on Wednesday to fully round out this concept, this notion that fights back against the doctrinal belief that heaven and hell are locations and that those locations are permanent, and come to the full understanding that heaven and hell are matters of the heart for you to manifest in this life and the next. Now, if you'll repeat after me, I love Him because He first loved me. Thank you, and God bless you. Like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.